These are my notes from me. As a pastor, I will talk for 5 hours and won't even look at the clock. I know what I'm talking about. I just can't keep time. Your story resonated with me about your special operator friend because it's one of the biggest challenges I had transitioning. This is not a part of the script. Transitioning out of law enforcement into ministry. I discovered that ministry was measurably more difficult than being a hostage negotiator. Measurably. You would sit in rooms with other pastors and faith leaders, and we would recite scriptures that said, you know, greater love has no man than he who lay down his life for his brother. And I'm looking around the room like, nobody here is going to die for me. Nobody. It's one of the biggest struggles I had transitioning out of law enforcement was that camaraderie and that brotherhood. But what I learned was that the pastors and the faith leaders who I worked with, they might not lay down their life for me in the traditional sense that we might think of, but they were willing to face hell for me. They were willing to pray for me. They were willing to stand in the gap for me in a way that maybe some of my other armed buddies would not do, and I learned to value it just as much. So that was just something top of mind that stood out to me. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Dunlap, and I appreciate you guys giving me an opportunity to share with you all this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about conflict. Before I get too far into the conversation, can I ask a question? Yes. Okay, fantastic. It was not hypothetical. Sometimes when I come into rooms like this, some people are really on different spectrums of the conflict conversation. So I want to ask, if you would consider yourself conflict avoidant, someone who doesn't like conflict, someone who, when you hear the word conflict, your first thought is, not me. Hair stands up on the back of your neck, you kind of walk away from it. Put your hand up high so I can see who I'm talking to. All right, got some conflict avoidance in the room. All right, fantastic. If you're someone who says, you know what, I don't mind conflict. I don't mind a little confrontation. You know, for me, it's an opportunity for innovation and growth. Get a little challenge every now and then. If you're not so conflict averse, let me see your hand raised up high. All right, good mix in the room. All right. If you're someone who says, I love a good fight. It doesn't matter who it is, what we're talking about. I will fight you until my legs fall off. Hands up high, catch me outside. Anybody in the room? Okay, hold them real high. Hold them really high. These are the people you want to avoid. Okay? If you're at a table with them, don't talk to them. Okay? We will pray for them. Excellent. I want to share a story with you. Is that okay? All right. My hope is that by sharing this story anecdotally, you will leave here empowered, inspired, and hopefully equipped to become a more distinguished leader under pressure. A few years ago, I was serving as a police officer here in the Atlanta area, Gwinnett County, and I was facing a transition in my career. I was preparing to become a SWAT operator. Now, this is something I've been preparing for my whole career. And what ended up happening was I took the first 14 years of my career to learn how to be an operator. I graduated from high-speed schools, close-quarter battle schools, officer survival school, weapons and tactics. I was kicking in doors and throwing flashbangs. I was ready for it. All I needed was an opportunity to join the team. The last school I graduated was a prestigious FBI SWAT school. And I took that qualification with me the day the department said, hey, we need some guys to join the SWAT team. Now, the way it typically worked is you would put your packet together and submit it to your supervisor. Your supervisor would take a look at all your credentials. And I got to be honest with you, fellas, on paper, I was a stud. I had all of the qualifications. So I didn't think there were going to be any challenges. Submitted my packet to be considered for the SWAT team. And I got a radio call from my supervisor one night, not long after. His name was Mark. Got Mark's in the room. Okay, that was like, My supervisor's name was Mark. And Mark calls me on the radio and says, hey, meet me in the office. Now, for context, for anyone who's not in law enforcement, when the supervisor asks to see you, it's never good. In our line of work, no news is good news. We only see the boss twice a year. Mid-year review and final review. Okay? So being called into the office was not good. So I walk into the office and I said, sit down. Yes, sir. And he's got my packet in his hand. And he says, hey, Ryan, I got your packet for the SWAT team. I said, yeah. Stud, right? He says, hey, man, in good faith, I can't put my signature on this. I can't recommend you for this. Now, I'm spinning my head is doing its thing. Like, what did I do wrong? What have I shown, demonstrated, or articulated that made this man feel like I can't do what I've been training my whole career to do? And so I started asking him, I said, John, what did I do? Like, come on, did I do something wrong? And he says, no, man, calm down. It's nothing like that at all. You're good. Here's the thing, man. You're a really good communicator. Like, one of the best we've seen. Certainly the best on the squad. And I wanted to ask if you would consider becoming a SWAT hostage negotiator. What? I said, John, man, listen, I got to be honest with you, brother, man. The hostage negotiators are like the redheaded stepchildren of the police department. Most of those guys are like out of shape, okay? And I said, let's be honest, man. I wanted the guns, the gear, and I wanted that look. I didn't want a notepad and a cell phone. What made it worse, though, was that John was a 21-year SWAT sniper, and so his words had weight. And he said, hey, listen, I really think you ought to consider it, and as long as you're working for me, I'm not going to recommend you for operation. And I said, this guy here, I'm going to pray for you. So I decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wait until I get transferred to another unit. I'll work for another boss, and or he'll get transferred out, and then we'll just go through the process. I'll do it all over again. I'll join the SWAT team later. Well, it just so happened, a couple of months later, I found myself at a crisis intervention communication school. And I'm in the school with a bunch of other communicators and interrogators from around the state, and there happened to be a group of guys who were hostage negotiators from another agency. And so I said to myself, I guess I could ask a couple questions since I'm here. So I introduced myself, and I walk over, and I said, hey guys, let me ask you a question. What does it take to do your job? What does it take to be a hostage negotiator? And one of the negotiators got up, and he kind of had this smug look on his face, like, well. Asking for help, huh? He said, do you want to know what it takes to be a hostage negotiator? I said, yeah. What does it take to do your job? What does it take? And he says, let me ask you a question. He says, how are you most likely to get someone killed? I didn't have an answer. I was kind of perplexed. And I said, come again? He said, how are you most likely to get someone killed? He said, let me rephrase it for you. You look a little slow. How are you most likely to show up in a bad situation and make it significantly worse? What are the things you're most likely to do or say that's going to cause an innocent hostage, another police officer on the SWAT team, or dare we say it, the suspect himself, to be killed in operation? What bad habits do you have that you're going to bring into my crime scene that's going to cost somebody their life? And I was like, well, and I thought about it. And I felt like I had to give a compelling answer. And I said, I'm a little impatient. I can be impatient sometimes, and I'll abandon an effective process for a faster process. And he says, I don't really care what the answer to the question is. I just need you to know the answer to the question. I need you to know what you're most likely going to do so that when I put you on a team somewhere, you don't cost someone their life. It was one of the most intriguing conversations I'd ever had with someone. And if I'm honest with you today, it is the foundational reason I serve as a conflict strategist and as a conflict coach. It is the number one question I ask everyone that I coach and everyone that I train in the space of conflict, though I ask the question a little bit differently. If you are one of my coaching clients, one of the leaders that I get to speak into, I would ask the question this way: how are you most likely to hurt someone in your care? As a husband, as a father, as a leader, as a believer, what trauma has not yet been healed in your life that you might project on somebody else? What offense have you been carrying that you've refused to forgive? What bad habits and sins have you been hiding you're afraid to admit that come out under pressure that can harm the people in your care? These are the questions. These are the questions. It's become foundational to what I do as a conflict strategist. As a company, Conflict-ish exists to help men and women, but primarily men, as it turns out, to get honest with themselves about themselves. To look in the mirror and to understand the things that we do that contribute to conflict, tension, misunderstanding, and adversity in our own circles. A lot of times when we have a conversation on conflict, the expectation is that someone is going to teach you how to solve a problem with another person. And the reality is you can't sit down and solve a problem with someone else until you can sit down and solve a problem with yourself first. Your judgments, your heuristics, your biases, the things that you carry within you that you don't want anyone to see are the things that you will project onto someone else in a moment of pressure. These are the kind of things that we as hostage negotiators can't afford to do. But I'll submit to you that it's something you can't afford to do either. As a husband, as a father, as a leader, and as a believer. You can't allow the negativity inside of you to come out of you. You have to get honest with yourself about yourself before you can try to get honest with someone else about who they are. Here's the cool thing about this. I didn't come up with any of this. This is not my genius idea. This is actually based on Scripture. Most of us have probably read this before. Matthew 7:5. You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. You know, a lot of times when we talk about conflict in the faith space, we pull up Matthew 18, and we talk about how to deal with conflict and offense with other people. But the reality is, before I can get to Matthew 18, I got to go through Matthew 7. Before I can get to solving problems with someone else, I got to solve problems within myself. Because if there's a plank in my eye, I can't see you as clearly as I think I do. And the lens that I have for you might be more or less a reflection of how I see myself rather than how I see you. So I've got to make sure my eyes are open so that I can see you without seeing me. Now, some of this stuff that we're talking about, these things that are inside, we actually have a name for it in the company. We call them issues. The name of the company is Conflict-ish. The ish, initially, hear me out, I'm still saved, I promise. Initially, ish was a substitute for a four-letter word to help you deal with all your conflict-ish. You guys can put your heads there. Organically, though, what happened as the organization began to grow and expand and we got clients on 4 continents, I realized something very important. Ish was really shorthand for issues, conflict issues. And we spell it differently. We spell it issues. All the ish you do that contributes to conflict, tension, and misunderstanding. Some of us are selfish, foolish, childish. We have diminished productivity issues, hellish attitudes. We do squeamish things and have squeamish conversations. We help you get rid of all of that ish. The reality is we're all full of ish. Look at somebody at your table and say, man, you're full of ish, man. Don't hesitate. I know some of you guys have worse language than this outside of this room. Look at somebody else and say, man, you're really full of ish. I see it on you. This is why good people do bad things. One of the biggest challenges that we have is, even after we've done bad things, check it out, we don't consider ourselves bad people. Most of us in this room have done things we're not proud of, said things that we're not proud of, things that if it came to light, we would be embarrassed for other people to find out. Yet, we walk up with our heads held high and our shoulders rolled back, and we consider ourselves good people. And we are. We are good people. But sometimes we do bad things. It's our sinful nature. Paul talks about this. He says, there are things I don't want to do that I keep doing, and things that I do want to do, I don't do. He attributed it to his sinful nature. Outside of spirituality, there is a behavioral and an emotional component to this as well. Okay? Something more practical that I think we should really understand about ourselves is that most of you don't need me. You don't need me to teach you conflict management or conflict strategy. Did you know that? You guys are looking at me confused. I promise you, you really don't need me. I don't even make my work and my living doing conflict management training. Most of what I do is something else. But before I get there, let's test the waters. I'm going to try to prove my point for a second. Can I do that? Okay, let's do this. Hypothetically, if you're in conflict with someone else, Is it best to A, yell and scream and cuss at them, or speak low, slow, and be an effective listener? What do you think? B. Who says A? Look around, look around. Okay? If you're in conflict with someone, is it better to speak on top of them so that they don't get a word in edgewise, or to give them space to be heard and understood? What do you think? B. Reluctantly, I know, but B. You guys are proving my point. You already know what to do. You know that you have to speak low and slow. You know you have to be an effective listener. You can't be a jerk and solve problems. It doesn't work. The problem is this. Most people don't have a conflict management problem. They have an emotional management problem. We know how to solve problems. We just don't know how to do it when we're angry. We know how to solve problems. We just don't know how to do it when we're offended, when we're frustrated, when we're upset, when we're disappointed, when we didn't get our way, when we feel like justice hasn't been served, and we allow ourselves to act outside of ourselves and compromise our character and lose our composure. That is when people call me. I teach emotional management under the guise and auspices of being a conflict strategist. It's just because it's easier to tell people, oh, conflict, sure. Other than like, you are emotionally unstable. Most people don't want to hear that. It's emotional pressure management. In fact, there are 3 things specifically that emotions and high pressure do that can cause you to lose your composure or act outside of character. First one is this. Pressure reveals character. There are things about you that you typically keep under control. Some of us in this room, don't raise your hand, have like really bad profanity problems. We cuss and yell and scream, and we have conversations we're not always proud of, but when we come to church on Sunday, praise the Lord, brother. It's great to see you. Praying for you, my brother. Nobody comes to worship and starts cussing. But as soon as you get into traffic in the parking lot after the sermon's over, some of you guys are stretching yourselves. Pressure reveals character. There are things that we can typically do when we're not under pressure that we don't do well under pressure. In the sports world, we call this choking. Okay? I'm joking on myself here. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. I don't want to hear anything. We can't make it. I don't know what it is. We just choke in the playoffs. Studies have shown that a lot of times one of the reasons that we choke or we fail under pressure is because we become hyper-focused on failure. We get so nervous about not hitting our objective, not doing the thing that we set out to do, that we actually create the circumstances we're afraid of. We walk into a bad situation and say, gosh, I hope I don't fail. I hope I don't lose. I hope I don't disappoint. And that's exactly what happens. Pressure. Because our faith and our fear use the same muscle. Do you know that? Fear is just faith in a negative outcome. And many of us are walking around with faith in a negative outcome called fear. This is why so many people don't engage in introspective work. They're afraid of what they will find out about themselves. This is why 89% of people report that they do not actually step into conflict conversations. They avoid it and let conflict escalate until it becomes a crisis, and they have no choice but to do something with it. Pressure reveals your character. You'll do things that you don't necessarily do, say things you don't necessarily mean under pressure. But pressure does something else. It also alters performance. Anybody here in the room like sing in the shower or in the car? Anybody? Right over here, a couple guys. Okay. I love to sing in the shower. I sing in the car, I'm like Grammy award winning. I am. I'm a stud in the car too. Give me a microphone and turn on some music though. I'm not singing on this stage. It's not going to happen. Okay? And most people who sing in private won't sing in public. Most people who perform in private won't perform in public. And it's because under pressure, our ability to perform is also compromised, just like our character is. The things that we thought we were going to be able to do, the values that we say we espouse, the morals and the ethics that we hold, they fall apart under pressure. There's a third thing that pressure does. It distorts reason. Under pressure, you start compromising judgment. You make decisions that you wouldn't typically make. You start deciding, you know what I'm going to do? That's it. I'm going to cuss him out. I'm going to my boss's office. I'm going to cuss him out. I'm losing my mind. You wouldn't typically do that, but pressure made you do it, right? More than once? Okay. All right. I was concerned about this side of the room for a second. Every day, Ryan, every day I'm cussing somebody out. Help me. It distorts reason. What we want to do as men is we want to become more distinguished under pressure. We want to be the person that people come to, the person that people rely on when things aren't doing good. Like when we're not feeling good, we can do good. We want to dictate how we show up when things are blowing up. That's what it means to be distinguished as a man. Because distinguished leaders perform well under pressure. Back when I had that conversation with my peers in hostage negotiation, they were telling me, like, I need you to recognize where you're weak because you're not going to be able to walk in that weakness when it's your turn to have that conversation. When the pressure is on, I need you to be at your best. You can't compromise your character. When the pressure is on, your performance can't fall apart. You can't choke. When the pressure is on, you have to be sharp and you have to be able to think straight. This is the difference between an average communicator and an expert communicator. It's the difference between a hostage negotiator and everybody else. We perform well under pressure. A lot of people think that what we do requires like advanced, specialized training. It's helpful, but if I'm honest with you, 90% of the problems that we solve in hostage negotiation are solved with 10% of our skill set. We do the basics really, really well. We listen. Tell me more about that. Pull up a seat. Put the gun down, though. We speak low and slow. I already talked to a handful of guys who said, I read Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. He talks about the late night FM DJ voice, how you can walk into a dangerous situation and talk like a late night FM DJ. Got to be honest with you guys, I never use this one. Not me personally, but it works. Research has shown that we can speak low and slow and we can be influential in situations. So we want to be distinguished. But what does it mean to be distinguished? Got some character traits for you. To be distinguished, it means to be above reproach, faithful, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, a teacher, sober, gentle, not quarrelsome, good steward, seasoned, respectable, and reputable. Does that sound familiar to anyone? 1 Timothy. We got some Bible readers in the room. This is what it means to be distinguished. The Bible gives you a clear blueprint. 1 Timothy tells us our first ministry is what? Our family. So it matters that we show up consistently, not just when people are paying attention, but when people can't see us. At home with our wife and our kids. You know, one of the number one questions that was asked of me when I finally got my audition to try out for the SWAT hostage negotiation team, one of the first questions they asked was, hey, if we called your wife and asked her about the last couple of months, what would she tell us about you? They always say, ask someone's wife, ask someone's husband, and you'll find out who they really are. Thank goodness, 23 years of dating and 18 years of marriage, I don't have a bad report. But what would your spouse say? What would your kids say? What would your neighbors say? Colleagues and coworkers, business partners. Would they describe you as a distinguished gentleman? As someone who is cool, calm, and collected under pressure? Someone who is dependable and reliable under pressure? Would they say that you are a problem solver or a problem causer? Because before you sit down with somebody else, you got to sit down with yourself. So how would you define yourself? Do you meet the 1 Timothy model? Do you see your name in this scripture? Is this describing you or someone you aspire to be? The truth is, conflict is a byproduct of the people involved in it. This is what I'm trying to get you to understand. One of our core beliefs as conflict strategists is that there is no such thing as healthy conflict. It's a cardinal sin in our industry because we always tell people, embrace healthy conflict. Embrace it. Even for those of you who raised your hand at the beginning and said, Ryan, I like good conflict. Can I be honest with you? Most people don't like good conflict, even the ones who say they do. You know what they like? They like the outcomes. They like what comes from good conflict. And this is why there's no such thing as healthy conflict. Many of us can go into a conflict, contentious environment with someone, have a really hard conversation, solve a real problem, and walk away absolutely hating them. And we say to ourselves, whew, glad that's over, never talking to Jim again. That was terrible. I hate that guy. You get text messages and emails from Jim and you're like, nope, nope, last time we spoke. And this is because what happens is we think conflict is problem solving, but conflict is really people solving. Healthy conflict is a byproduct of healthy people and healthy relationships. If you are healthy and you utilize healthy practices when solving problems with other people, you will experience a healthy form of conflict. But if you are negative, hostile, aggressive, if you show up into conflict with a bunch of ish, you're going to come out smelling like ish. It's okay to laugh. So somebody like held it in. It was like, oh, it's okay. If you're experiencing unhealthy conflict, it's probably because one or more of the people involved are unhealthy and they don't live up to this standard. Think back to the last time you were in contentious conversation with someone. Did it go well? I saw somebody's head go, no. How much of that was on you? How much of it would have changed if you showed up differently as a distinguished gentleman? We can't control other people. We can't dictate when other people show up to the conflict table or how they show up. But we also know that how we show up influences other people greatly. When someone walks into a room, they have a presence. Some of us are atmosphere changers. Others, not so much. Ask yourself, when you walk into a contentious environment, are you the cool, calm, collected person that can cool down a heated situation? Are you the warm gentleness that can warm up a cold room? Are you a thermostat or a thermometer? Do you read the room or do you change the air? And if you change it, do you change it for the better or for the worse? This is what it means to be distinguished. 94% of hostage negotiations end successfully. 94%. That is a ridiculous statistic. Barricaded gunmen, barricaded suspects, shots fired, people's lives on the line. 94% of the time, they end successfully. And most of us can't even choose what to eat for dinner with our spouse on a daily basis. What is happening? That hit home for somebody. He's like, she wanted Mexican last night. I get it. So I want to try to help. I want to try to help you guys become a little more distinguished. I want to try to help. There are three things I want to share with you I think could be a little beneficial for you all. Okay, now this is informational, not necessarily transformational. I only got a couple of minutes, okay? So we got to go high level, high context here, okay? But think about yourself at the very beginning, at the genesis of a difficult conversation with someone, and you have to make a decision. Am I going to show up as a distinguished gentleman, or am I going to demonstrate a hellish attitude, a selfish disposition, some childish behavior, some foolish dialogue, whatever that is? Assuming that you want to be distinguished, there are some things I want you to do. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to work on mastering self-awareness. Now, here's the challenge with self-awareness. You can have too much or too little self-awareness. Most people think they are self-aware, but they're absolutely not. They're not. I'm sorry. Anybody here think you're self-aware? Nobody? I mean, a little bit. No, not. That was the punchline. That was the punchline.
We have our moments.
We have our moments. I love it, Wally. That's awesome. 95% of people assume that they are self-aware. 95%. Research shows that only around 10 to 15% of people actually are. So most of us are walking around blindly. This is the consequence of not having self-awareness. We lead blindly. We don't know how we impact other people. We don't know how we leave them in our wake. Most of us walk into contentious conversations and there's collateral damage. People are hurt. We don't know it. People are offended. We don't know why. We lack self-awareness. So in a moment, when you have an opportunity to show up and be your best, potentially change a bad situation and make it better, there's a question I want you to ask yourself. Here's the first question. This is an in-the-moment question. Okay? In the moment. How do I want to be remembered? How do I want to be remembered? At the end of this conversation, a week from now, what will my legend be? What's the story somebody else is going to tell somebody else about me? How I showed up, how I handled myself. How do I want to be remembered? This is what it means to walk into a conversation with the end in mind at the very beginning. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People says we should always start with the end in mind. And the problem is that most people don't go into conflict with the end in mind because they're so stuck on the beginning. What am I going to say? What am I going to do? What if they do this? What if I do that? And we get stuck trying to remember a script or rehearse a process, and that's not where conflict resolution happens. Remember, conflict resolution is not about problem solving. It's about people solving. All I have to do is show up and be human. And at the end of that experience, the question I want to ask myself is, how do I want to be remembered as a man, as a husband, as a father, and as a believer? Number 2, we've got to build some self-confidence, fellas. Self-confidence. Now, unfortunately, it's absolutely possible to have too much self-confidence. We typically call that arrogance. Arrogance. But here's one of the problems in faith communities. Most of us think that the opposite of arrogance is humility, and it isn't. The opposite of arrogance is insecurity. Humility is the balance of knowing who you are and whose you are and not being cocky about it. It's a balance. I know what I can do, and I know what I got to rely on him to do. I know what he put inside of me, and I know what I'm supposed to do when I get into certain situations, when I step into certain rooms. There are some things I'm going to have to do in my own power, my own strength, and certain things I'm going to have to release. Confidence is necessary for conflict. Most of us don't navigate difficulty because we're afraid of the outcomes. We're afraid of what might happen. But I want to ask you to not focus on the outcomes. I want you to focus on the outputs. See, as negotiators, one thing that I know is I can't control what someone decides to do. All I can dictate is how I showed up to the party. True story, my last negotiation ended with the suspect I was talking to being shot by a sniper. Not my proudest moment. I talked to this man for a long time. He was barricaded in a back bedroom. He was shooting indiscriminately through walls and doors and windows, shooting at me and my partners. I was standing at the front door with a rifle-rated shield that was supposed to be able to stop 223 and 5.56 rounds. I didn't test it out. We got exfilled pretty quickly when the TAC team showed up, but I was the first SWAT officer there, TAC or on the negotiation side. Happened to be around the corner from my house. And this gentleman had a mental health crisis and took it out on his neighbors and his roommates. And I remember talking to this guy, saying for the longest time, I was like, hey, man, why don't you put the gun down so we can have a conversation? Now, mind you, he's in the back of a house behind like a closed door. I had no Bearcat, no megaphone, so I wasn't, hey, man. I was screaming, why don't you put the gun down? Okay. And he would scream back through the door and he'd say, why don't you come back here and take it from me? And I was like, I'm not doing that. How much confidence do you think it takes to step into the line of fire like that? How much confidence does it take to face the unknown? Now here's what I'll tell you. We were trained to face it on a life or death level. You guys don't have to face life and death situations. You just got to fight ego and pride. That's the hardest thing, stopping us from walking into a situation. We don't have to worry about failure. My job was not to worry about how this situation ended because I couldn't control the ending. All I could do was control my outputs, and so I talked as long as I could. I tried to convince this gentleman, put the gun down, don't want to do that. Trust me, you don't want to do it. And ultimately, he raised the gun through a window, and Sierra Alpha, our sniper on the Alpha side of the building, called out ever so calmly, shots fired, in his southern accent. I was floored. I said, what? Subjects down, radio. I was like, oh no. They shot him. He deserved it, but they shot him. We're sitting in the Bearcat, and I got the SWAT team commander with me, and he's kind of looking like, what just happened? I was like, I'm looking at you, boss. You tell me. As we were sitting there trying to figure out the next move, which was going to be to send a robot into the residence to check and see his condition, I got a radio dispatch from our dispatcher who says, CNT 12, switch TAC 2, TAC channel, like a confidential channel. So I switched my radio over. I was like, radio, I'm in the middle of a negotiation. She's like, yeah, 10-4, just to be clear, there's a gentleman on the phone who just called in, said he's been shot, and he wants to talk to you. And I'm like, now he wants to talk. I said, put him through, radio. I get this phone call, and it's the guy in the house. And he says, hey, man, I've been shot. I can't get up. I'm hurt, man. I need help. And I said, I told you to put the gun down. He said, I didn't think you guys were going to do it, man. I said, this guy. Put together the exfil team, or the entry team. They went inside and patched him up, put him on a gurney, put him in the back of the ambulance. And once he came out of the house, I got to talk to him. And I was like, man, come on. I told you to put the gun down. You kept telling me, come back there and take it from me. You kept saying you were going to shoot me. He was like, I didn't mean it. And he didn't. You know why? Pressure. Altered his character. Altered his performance. Distorted his reason. He wasn't thinking clearly. He was saying things he didn't mean the things he was saying, and it took a moment before reality set in. This is how most of us break down when we say and do things we don't mean. It's not until after we finish the bad thing, we're like, uh-oh, I didn't mean to do that. But now we got to deal with the consequences. Luckily for our friend, he didn't die. So I'm still, my record, I left law enforcement with a clean record. Nobody died on my watch, but I got close. It takes confidence to be the person on the other side of that call. It takes confidence to step into difficult conversations. I share that story because I want you to have context for what real difficulty is so that you can look at your own life and your own circumstances, the things that you're avoiding, and really ask yourself, is this too big for me? Is this problem too big for me? Is this really something I can't solve? Is this something that pride and ego were aside and I really kind of focus on how I showed up in the conversation? Wasn't focused on the outcomes. I can't control what another person does, but I focus on my outputs. Can I at least do that much? Can I be a distinguished gentleman in this contentious situation and try to be the example that I hope to see? My hope is that your answer is yes, because it takes courage to show up with dignity and respect and humility and humanity in difficulty. It absolutely does, but that's the charge of a distinguished man. Here's the last one. Oh, wait, I didn't even get to the good part. What's the story I'm telling myself about myself? This is the question I want you to ask yourself. When you're stepping into difficult conversations, what happens a lot of times is we will convince ourselves we're not good enough. We'll convince ourselves we're not strong enough. We'll convince ourselves that we don't have what it takes. Somebody else should do it. Whatever the story is, I want you to fire your inner narrator. that person's fired. If there's any voice that's going to be talking to you in the back of your head, it better be that of the Holy Spirit. When you walk into difficulty, I want you to remember whose you are, that you are fearfully and wonderfully made for times such as this. And I want you to remember your Ezekiel story. Ezekiel was told he was going to have to go do something difficult. He was going to have to go confront some people. And God did not pull out any punches when he said, by the way, bro, this is going to suck. Okay? He tells Ezekiel, it'll be as if you are walking through thorns and scorpions and briars. Pay no attention to the looks on their faces or the words that come out of their mouth. They will not like you. Good luck. No, he didn't say good luck. He said, if you keep my word in your mouth, they will know that a prophet has been sent. They will know that I sent you. He said, if you show up like a distinguished gentleman, I'll do the rest of the work. You solve my people, I'll solve the problem. I need you to go and be the light. I need you to be the example. That's what it's going to take to solve this problem. God does the heavy lifting. We show up, and we just don't get in his way. Can you do that? Yes. 4 people. Awesome. I'm teasing. It's early. The last one is demonstrate radical self-control. Radical self-control. This is pretty simple. And we've already talked about it. You're not going to be able to control people. One of the number one questions I get from people all the time when we start having these conflict conversations is they ask questions like, what do I do if the other person doesn't want to show up to the table and have the hard conversation? Or what do I do if they start yelling and screaming? Or what do I do if they've been avoiding the hard talk for years? My answer is always, don't worry about the things you can't control. That's hard for people because we want to be in control. And when people don't do the things that we want them to, we feel unjustified. How dare you? I'm trying to do the right thing. They don't want to do it, Ryan. So we put ourselves on a pedestal. Here's the reality. There's a question you have to ask yourself, and it's this. What's in my control, and what should I give to God? Great story in the Bible. Book of Judges. A guy by the name of Gideon. Guy was kind of a coward. Okay? Hiding, taking care of his food way up in the mountains. Every year complaining about what the Midianites were doing to his people. God, why don't you do something about these Midianites? Send help. Year after year. Send help. God's like, well, I got my man. And Gideon is told to go confront the Midianites in his own power. And he was like, me? I'm the least of my people. I can't fight. I'm a farmer. What's interesting is from the moment he departs until he arrives on the battlefield, Gideon is faced with a number of challenges in which God challenges him to get rid of his army that had been amassed. So much so that by the time they get there, there's only 300 of them. And you got to imagine this for a second. Like, let's think about this practically in Gideon's time, right? Imagine the voice of the Lord speaks over this room right now and says, hey guys, we're about to go down to Zone 4 in Atlanta and fight some gangs. All of us. Y'all ready? Like, what? This group? I'm not saying anything ill about you guys, but you understand the context here, right? There's street gangs out there. They got guns and stuff, God. But God's like, hey, I don't need you to focus on the things that are outside of your control. Focus on what's in your control. Go in the strength that you have. I imagine this is the same thought that the people had around Jericho. Just walk around the building. Just walk around it. It'll fall. It's like, what? Cool thing about that story is God chose Gideon a form of unconventional warfare. The battle he thought he was going to have to fight never came to pass. It said that in the darkness and the confusion of the trumpets and the lights, the enemy slain themselves. They never had to lift a sword. All they had to do was be brave enough to step in. Control the things that they could control and give the rest to God. Many of the problems that we face are outside of our control. The one thing that we can dictate is how we choose to show up when things are blowing up. And if we can do that with self-awareness, self-confidence, and self-control, if we go into difficult conversations asking ourselves, how do I want to be remembered? What's the story I'm telling myself about myself? And asking this question, what's in my control and what do I need to give to God? Remembering the scripture from 1 Timothy that tells us what it means to be a distinguished man. If we do that effectively, we can learn how to be distinguished leaders under pressure. We will improve how we show up, how we lead ourselves, and how we lead others. We will be the example, the standard bearer. We don't have to talk about being dark and light. Or being light in the darkness, rather. Don't do that part. We don't have to just talk about it. We can be about it. We can be the people that other people celebrate. We can be the example that other men say, I want to be like him. I want to be like him. I want to be like him because I know that they are like him. It's not about who we are. It's about who we represent. When you walk out of this room and you face contention, here's what I'm going to tell you. Many of us fail daily to actually represent the Lord well. But today is an opportunity to shift that narrative. You don't have to just show up looking good on the outside. You can be good on the inside. You can be distinguished. You can get your ish together. The hardest negotiation you'll ever have is a negotiation with yourself. This is the truth. You have to be willing to have the hard conversation with you about you. What are you going to do? Not just what do you believe. What are you going to do about what you believe? Will you be who you say you are? If you do that well, you will be distinguished. What questions do we have? Thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate you.